Hello everybody, it's David Rauschendorfer, your cybersecurity resource. And in this module, we're going to discuss the Secure Configuration Standard. These are often called your IT Security Standard Configuration Guidelines. So the purpose of these guidelines and this standard is to mandate a consistent application of your configurations across all of the assets your organization uses, so that you kind of are setting baselines, you're setting some requirements for how the build-out processes look like, what security controls are required on what level of solutions, those type of things. So that is the purpose. Your standard, so this is going to apply again across the enterprise, so all of these things are going to get a standard configuration setting and baseline. So basically some guidelines in place for the governance of all of these layers. They must protect the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of your environment. So you're really looking for that consistent application. So you're developing the guidelines that you're setting out for the organization on as new systems come into the organization, or as you are managing systems in your organization. What are the guidelines and requirements for those configurations? You know, what security controls are required, how are you governing them, and all of those things. So your implementation guidelines, each department is expected to review the material that comes through this module, through the downloads for you to review, and then identify what is going to be applicable, what makes sense for their department, for their organization, and then implement those requirements as it's what fits within their responsibility. So again, in this mandate, all these managers, anybody that is a system owner, system admin, database administrators, any other personnel with information asset management responsibilities must ensure that the information assets under their control or influence are developed, configured, and maintained to support security policies, right? So the organization has defined a set of security policies, so it's up to the management staff to ensure that they, what's ever under their responsibility is falling in line with those security policies. And all of the related standards, which comes in line with the standard configuration guidelines and any configuration requirements that you outline throughout this documentation that we're going to review. So from a compliance standpoint, if any asset connecting to your network, your trusted network, cannot be configured securely, then the administrator of that device has to put in a security exception request saying that they can't conform that device to meet the security policy for the organization. As far as interpretation, just kind of bullet points to housekeeping items, the information provided in this standard and in the downloads that you're getting in this module is not meant to be OS, database, or application specific. So you're going to need to make sure that you customize all of this and look through all of these items in this configuration guidelines and ensure that they make sense for how you manage your architecture, your infrastructure, what kind of OSs and databases you're using, and how that works. So your threat and vulnerability management. So thinking big picture as where this can fit in is in your threat and vulnerability management program. Secure configuration is really just one comprehensive component to that program. As you can see here, this process, you also would include patch management as well as vulnerability management. But these secure configuration guidelines are really going to be what's going to assist us in governing these security controls and the implementation of them throughout the organization as it aligns to the policy and the requirements that have been set out there. So this is just the highlighting component that don't think that completing these security configuration standards and guidelines documentation means that you're completely secure and that you don't have to worry about anything else. There is the larger threat and vulnerability management aspect. Some of that we cover in the process documentation here of how that's going to be conducted from patch management and vulnerability management. And again, that's going to feed into later on building that high-level threat and vulnerability management program and the full governance that covers these components and a few others. So, make sure that you're keeping these components in mind and that you're not you're staying in scope with what this document really is going to do for you and your organization. So with the secure configuration standard and those guidelines that you're setting out, you're trying to manage your information assets in a secure lifecycle approach. So everything from inception, when you're bringing on new solutions, and creating solutions, is really going to get into the development aspect. Where if your organization is actually developing applications or something of that nature, understanding how that goes, as well as the ongoing development of just your infrastructure, keeping that up to date and maintained. So the other aspect of your life cycle is going to be production. So ensuring that your development staff really should not have administrative access to production resources. If you are developing, say, applications and you have patient data in that production environment, is there really a true business case for why the entire development staff need to have access to that database with all the EPHI in it? If not, then, restrict that down and make it to just the least necessary. So something to make sure that you look at and think about in your production environments. From a maintenance standpoint, that secure configuration can be periodically tested and vulnerability scanned to ensure new issues and vulnerabilities do not exist. So once you have this standard configuration, some of these aspects come into play where, certificates need updated and all of those components. And so going through and conducting a vulnerability scan is something that's going to make sure that you continue to identify vulnerabilities on an ongoing basis and make sure you're patching and taking care of those components as those risks and vulnerabilities come up, that you're addressing and managing them appropriately. Retirement, again, as you think of your assets that you're using across your organization, be it, servers, network infrastructure, laptops, desktops, how are you going to retire them? Are you going to be able to reuse them? Have you established a process for wiping those assets before they get reused, or is there a destruction process to ensure that there's no critical data left on any of those assets? All of those components can come into play when documenting out these standards and guidelines. So your device build documentation, depending on the size of your organization, it says administrative groups should develop a specific build documents. If you just have one IT department, obviously this is kind of just that one department Depending on, if you are larger and some of these responsibilities are scaled out to multiple IT groups, then it's really up to them for those administrative groups, like it says, to build those documents of an operating system with all the appropriate configurations and software, right? So you need to have that baseline in place for all of these components, for your server, for your laptops. What does that standard baseline configuration look like? Standard image look like for your organization, or for the roles, the varying roles within your organization even. So it kind of goes through a checklist here. All build documents should be reviewed to ensure compliance with the configuration requirements. Should be used rather than out-of-the-box configurations. So when you're purchasing something, you should make sure that you're ensuring it complies with your configuration standards, and then upgrading those out-of-the-box features so that they do comply with those standards. When it needs to updating and patching or hotfix levels that must be applied, post-build processes exceed a reasonable implementation level, or these issues justify a build update. All of those instances are going to require a build configuration to be updated. So, there's multiple reasons. After you build a standard baseline, that doesn't mean, again, it's going to stay the baseline forever. As things change, as things come into play, patching and all of those components, needing to keep a log of that baseline being updated so you can ensure that you're using the latest one and that you have a good solid image as you're working through implementing these assets. All of those should be updated, like we just talked about. Build configurations should provide desired functionality immediately. So this goes into testing. A lot of times in your patching process, you're testing those patches to ensure that they are not going to restrict any functionality on your users before you implement them and push them out into production. So extensive updating, adjusting, and adding of functionality indicate a need to update the build configuration. So, again, if you're having to do a lot of updates and changes after the fact, after the build process is done, then it's time to take a look at that build. Don't just leave it for what it is and then create more work over and over for yourself. Vendor supplied device build documents. So build documents supplied by vendors should be reviewed against your configuration requirements as listed in the document and in the downloads here. Anything that doesn't meet your requirements needs to go through an exception request process. Understanding the patching, who's going to conduct patching, and that routine patching, how it's going to be addressed. We're seeing less of this, but if you are working with maybe medical devices or things under FDA purview, if something you think needs to be updated from a security component, then and you go back to the vendor and they tell you that it's FDA certification, they can't change anything. That's not truly the case. They can do patching and keep things up to date and keep certificates up to date and all of those things. It doesn't mean that they have to get a new FDA certification, and FDA knows that, and so it's not a real thing. So make sure that you're working through those components and working through any hurdles that come into your play to make sure that you're meeting these standards and guidelines to the best of your ability and aligning to them as you release things into your environment. The other component when you're looking at this and after you're done documenting these standards and guidelines is possibly looking at assets that you've already deployed into your environment. So remediation of existing devices. These standards will help to ensure the secure configuration of newly implemented systems, but existing systems may remain insecure. Standards should be used to review those existing systems, and then send them through a remediation process, right? You can track that through a risk register type of document as vulnerabilities, put some risk ratings on them, and then put them through a remediation process. So the process maintenance, secure configuration standard needs to be reviewed annually or as required. So if you're doing significant changes in your environment, you're probably going to want to take a look at this secure configuration standard and update it accordingly. But at least annually, take a look to make sure it still is applicable and it's still up to date with what's being used and what needs to happen in your environment. Updates should be reviewed by various technical stakeholders. Again, what that means for your organization. Final configuration changes are approved by the owner and management. So system owner, management staff, just appropriate parties across the organization. As you download the Excel document, it's going to have a number of tabs across the bottom, and we'll get into it. But what the IT standard configuration guidelines often look like are broken into your standard layers here. So you have your 5 core layers. You have network, server, application, database, and desktop. And so we're going to create some standard configurations across all of those. We're going to use this configuration matrix across all of those layers to set some guidelines, set some standards for the implementation of these components for the enterprise and for the organization. So as you kind of go down through there, general configuration components, you'll kind of see as you take a look at that Excel document what that is, and I'll pull it up here in just one second. Access configuration, obviously that's what access controls are there. Access user ID, privileges configuration, how are users privileged. Password configuration, file configuration, any log configuration, firewalls that need to be in place, services that need to be a part of those, antivirus. Data integrity configuration is key. Backup and BCP, which is business continuity practices, and disaster recovery configuration. Encryption and network configuration. All right. So it's going to go across all of those components here. I will quickly transition over on the Excel, and we'll pick it up there and do a quick overview of that. You should have probably already downloaded that, and then this document will be as a PDF that you can download too, and we will pick it up on the Excel file. All right, so on the Excel file you can see here that across the bottom we have all of the layers like we discussed. This first tab just has all of them here. And then it's going to get into all of those, the configuration matrix that we talked about on that slide. Again, general configuration being the first thing here. And then you can kind of take a look on the All tab, at least it's broken out here where it has all of these components. And then we're just documenting through this if it's mandatory or optional. So again, you can kind of set, guidelines for the organization. As you look at things, you can identify, is there going to be solutions where this may not be as applicable, where we're okay, where this is kind of an optional control or requirement for solutions. And you can always put that in there. So it's something that you want to see, but if the build process doesn't allow for it, then these are going to be the components, and you'll just be able to walk through this entire Excel document here and be able to read through all of these components and then make sure that they apply for your environment, how you have things set up, how all of that works, right? Get into access configuration. And make sure that all of it applies and makes sense. Update all of this language so that it's going to work for your organization. And this is something you're going to be able to share, right? Depending on, again, the size of your organization. If you're just in the IT department, or maybe you outsource IT, this is something you can provide to them and say, hey, I need to know how we're doing this. How are we managing this? Can you help me fill in this document? And they'll be able to provide clarification on that. Or if you have kind of multiple IT departments, and then being able to identify who's responsible for what and working with them to identify what makes the most sense from the architecture standpoint. So a lot of times that's how it's going. From a security standpoint, what we're doing is just partnering with the IT departments and making sure that there's secure processes being implemented into what they're wanting to do, that they're following good architectural habits and secure configuration standards and best practices while they're documenting what's happening here. So you're just going to want to walk through this entire document. Again, you can use this first tab with all of these areas and walk through them, or they are broken out for you in those tabs below. So this is going to take some time. You're going to have to set up a couple meetings maybe with a few different individuals. Start taking a look at this so that you start getting comfortable with each of these sections and what's in them and what's being asked in each of these areas. If you have any questions, make sure you leave it in the comments below, and I'll get back to you right away. And other than that, start cracking away at this. This is going to be a key aspect. This is often something that gets overlooked, but having a standard configuration is something that can really drive the security aspect for your organization. So you don't want to skip past this. It is really essential in building a secure process, right? And it's secure workflows is making sure that these standards are met, making sure that the people that are implementing the new systems and these setups are understanding why it's important, so that they actually carry out the requirements as we're documenting them here, is all going to be important. So hopefully that was a helpful walkthrough in understanding kind of your secure configuration standards, what goes into them and their purpose. And take your time in going through this. Make sure you get a good document that's really going to outline something that you'll be able to use going into the future. And we'll catch you on the next module. Thank you.